This video is sponsored by Dev Mountain. If you're interested in learning web development, iOS, or UX design, Dev Mountain is a 12-week design and development bootcamp intended to get you a full-time position in the industry. To learn more, visit devmountain.com or click the link in the description below. Hey, what's going on, guys? So in this video, we're going to create 3 different CSS loaders using a little bit of animation. And these 3 were inspired by a couple different code pens, and I'll put those links in the description. But basically, I have the first one here. If I reload, is going to be these 2 circles that kind of revolve and change sizes. And it runs for about 4 seconds, and then the main content comes in. Now this little landing page here, we're not going to do this till the very end. The main point of this is creating the loaders, but I did want to have it, give the effect that the page was actually loading. So we'll add a little bit of JavaScript at the end to do that. So the second one is going to be the text loading with the 3 dots that come in one by one. Okay, so that's going to be the second one, and then the last one is going to be these 3 circles that just kind of bounce. So that'll be the third one. All right, and they're all the same color scheme. What we're going to do is just have separate CSS files for each loader. And you can use these when you're fetching data from an API, for instance, something that, that takes a little bit of time. Or you could just add it like we're doing here and just have a little effect for your website. Even though you don't need it, it's just a nice little effect for your users. All right, so let's jump in and get started. All right, so we're going to get started here. I just want to go over the structure real quick. I don't have any code written at all. I just created the files. So we have an index.html. We have inside our CSS folder a style.css, and then loader 1, 2, and 3.css. So we can separate the styling for each loader, and we can see one at a time. And then I just have a main.js inside of a JS folder, and that's where we're going to add the set timeout so we can bring in the content. Okay, so let's start off with our HTML. I'm going to just put in a boilerplate here, and let's change the title to CSS Loaders. And then I'm going to bring in, let's bring in our main style sheet, so CSS/style CSS. And then let's also bring in loader 1, since that's what we're working with first. And then in the HTML, for loader 1, we need to have a div with the class of loader. They're actually all going to have a class of loader, but for this one, we're also going to have 2 divs inside with the class of circle, because if you remember, they're the 2 circles that basically rotate and change sizes as they rotate. They scale up. So let's save that. We're not going to add the paragraph and the heading and stuff until last. So now let's open this. I'm going to run it with live server. And obviously we don't have anything here. It's just blank, but let's open up our style CSS and let's add some of these core stylings here. Now I'm going to paste these in just because I don't want to take the time to type all this out, especially where it doesn't have anything to do with the actual loaders. So first is the fonts. I'm using the Lato font as well as this ZCool Quali. I don't even know how to say that, but this font here is for the second loader, which is the text with the ellipses. That's what this font is. All right, and then I'm just going to throw in a reset here. So border box, and then we're just taking the margin and padding off of everything, and then the body, where we implement the font size, the line height, the background. I'm using linear gradient, so we get a gradient effect. And then we're setting the entire body to flex, and we're using flex direction columns so that they stack on top instead of in a row. And then we're just aligning everything to the center, both horizontally and vertically. And we're taking up the entire height of the browser, of the window, or viewport, I should say. All right, so let's save that, and you can see the gradient very light gradient. And then we're going to now jump into loader 1 CSS and get started with the first loader. Now I'm going to write this in a way that I can explain it best rather than just doing it linear. So let's start off with our loader, which is the wrapper. Remember, we have loader and then we have 2 circle divs. So the height of the entire thing is going to be 50 pixels. All right, and then we have our circles, and we're going to set the background color to purple, or you could use whatever you would like. And then I'm going to set a height of 40 pixels and a width also of 40 pixels. And if I save that, we just get 2 purple squares, which obviously isn't what we want. Let's turn them into circles by adding a border radius of 50%. Okay, now I want the second circle to be a different color, so I'm going to just go ahead and say circle, and I'm going to use the pseudo selector nth child, and let's pass in 2. We want the second one, and we're going to set the background color, and we're going to set that to pale violet red, and save, and now we have 2 different color circles. So as far as the animation, there's 2 separate animations. One is going to be the rotation of the loader itself, and then the circles are going to scale, basically go up and down in size. So let's start with the first rotation, or first animation. So we'll say animation rotate. We're just calling it rotate here. 3 seconds long. It's going to be in a linear fashion and infinite because we want it to keep going. Now down here we're going to create our keyframe for that animation. So keyframes, rotate, and let's say 2, and we want it to rotate 360 degrees. So we're going to use transform here, use the transform property, and then rotate, and let's say 360 DEG. Okay, so if I save that, it's going to start to rotate. Now I want it to have a different effect as far as the transform origin, as far as like the position. So I'm going to add up here in loader transform dash origin, and let's say bottom center, and save. So now it rotates in a different way. Now the rotate is just one of the animations, so the circle is also going to have an animation. And we're going to call this grow, and it's going to be 1.5 seconds for the duration, linear, and infinite. Okay, so let's go down here and let's create the keyframe for that. So grow, and we want to say at 50%, we want to transform, and we're going to use scale here. Scale just brings it up and down in size, and we're going to do scale 1. Now this isn't going to do anything if I save it because it's scaled at 1 by default. So it's not actually doing anything. So what we'll do is we'll set the default scale of circle up here. Let's say transform scale, and we'll set it to 0, which is basically invisible. So we'll save that. Oops, I forgot. Let's see, transform scale. Wait a minute. Oh, I spelled transform wrong. Same thing goes though. It wouldn't work until I set the initial scale to 0. So now it starts at 0, and then every 1.5 seconds it scales to basically full size, normal size. All right, now there's a couple things we want to do in terms of the placement. I'm gonna add a margin to circle of -10 pixels. Okay, you can see it kind of brought them closer. And I'm going to add a delay because right now they're growing and shrinking at the same time, which I don't want. So the second circle, I'm going to add an animation delay, and I'm going to say 0.75 seconds. So now I'll save, and now you can see that there's a delay. All right, and now they're no longer touching, so that looks good. So that's pretty much it as far as the animation. Oh, one more thing that I wanted to do is display this as an inline block like that, because then it goes all the way around like that. Okay, so that's our first animation, our first CSS loader. So let's jump to the second one. So what I'll do is in index.html, I'm going to just comment out. Actually, first I'll copy this down and then comment this out, and we want to load loader 2. And let's just put a comment here that says loader 1, and then I'm going to just comment this out. All right, so basically starting from scratch. And then we're going to say loader 2. Now, loader 2 for the HTML is pretty simple. We're just going to have another class of loader, and then we're just going to have the text loading. And you can put any text you want. I'm just using the text loading. So let's save that, and we just see loading. So let's open up our Loader 2 CSS, and let's add the class of Loader. And I'm going to, like I said, use the font, that font family. What is it? Z Cool, and then it's K U A I capital L E, which is weird, and it's cursive. Okay, so that's the font family that we're going to use. I'm going to up the size a little bit. So font size, let's do 40 pixels. And for the color, I'm going to use that same pale violet red. Okay, so we get loading. Now, I want to add, we're adding content here. We're going to add the ellipses, or those 3 dots, right? So we're going to use the pseudo selector after. So let's say dot loader, double colon, and then after, which allows us to basically insert content via CSS. Now, for the content, we can use an ASCII code for the ellipses character, and that's going to be /2026. Okay, so if I save that, it's going to actually give us those 3 ellipses. Now, obviously they're not animating, it just puts them there. Now I'm going to set the, actually I'll do the width last, but I'm going to do a display inline block, and then I'm going to add an overflow of hidden, or else it's not gonna, it's gonna basically just keep, it's gonna show us the 3 at all times. So we want to do that. Now see how they moved up? We're gonna add a vertical align property and set it to the bottom. So that will move it down. It's actually in the middle, but that's fine. And then it's just the font. If this was a different font, I believe, let me just get rid of that. Yeah, so it'll be at the bottom. It's just this font where it's doing that. And then for the animation, we're going to call this dots, and we want basically 4 steps. So we're going to say steps, and then pass in 4, and then end. And we want this to last 2 seconds, and we want it to keep going, so we want it to be infinite. And then all I'm going to do here in the keyframe of dots is change the width. Now the width I'm going to set to 0 by default. So width is going to be 0 pixels, and save, and you'll see that now they're gone. So in our animation here, in our keyframe, all we're going to do is set the width to 1.25 m. And I think, yeah, that should be good. So let's save that. And there we go. So we just get each dot showing through each iteration, and the reason for that is we're increasing the width. So if I change this to like I don't know, 3.25 m, you can see that it's much wider, so it shows all 3 dots within the first animation or the first iteration. So we want to keep that around 1.25 m. If you want to use pixels, you could do like 45 pixels, I believe. Yeah, that's fine. All right, and basically M units, it's just relative to the parent font size. We have a size of 40 pixels here, so 1.25 is going to be 40 times 1.25. Okay, but if you want to use pixels, you can. So this is a pretty easy one, pretty simple. So now we're going to move on to the third one. I'm going to go ahead and copy that down and comment that out, and let's do Loader 3. And then let's comment out the HTML here. Whoops. Okay, and then put a comment. We'll say Loader 3. Now, the HTML for Loader 3 is going to be another class of Loader. And inside here, we're going to have 3 spans, just 3 empty spans, like that. Okay, that's all we need for the HTML. So let's save that. And let's go into Loader 3 CSS. And remember, this is like the bouncing dots. So we have a class of Loader, and we're going to display flex. Basically, each span is going to represent one of the dots, and we want them to be displayed in a row going across, so we're going to display them as flex. And then let's justify the content to the center, and let's align the items to the center. Okay, now let's take the first dot, which we can get with loader. I'm sorry, not the first dot, all of them, because we're just going to say all the spans. But I do want to be able to target the second and third, so we'll use nth child again. So we'll say loader span, and let's say nth child 2, and let's copy that down. And we also want to be able to get the third one. All right. So for all the spans here, let's do a display inline dash block. I want to be able to add a width and a height. The background, let's do background color. We'll do purple. Now, for the width and the height, we're going to want to start at just 0, because remember, what we're doing here is changing the size. We could use scale, but I'm going to just show you a different way using width. I'm sorry, width and height. It's going to start at 0, and then it's going to grow with the animation. But if I set it at 0 now, we won't be able to see them. So I'm just going to set it to 16 pixels height and width for now, just so we can actually see what we're doing. So we have 3 squares, which are all purple. Let's make them into circles. So border radius 50%. So now we have 3 circles. Let's add some margin on the left and right. So we'll say 0, and then let's do 8 pixels. Separate them out a little bit. And let's go to the second one. And I'm going to change the background color to pale, what is it, pale violet red. And the third one, actually the third one will just keep purple. But we're going to have to put a delay in both of these, so we're going to leave this anyway for now. All right, so now we have our 3 dots. Now for the animation, let's go on to the span here, and let's say animation, and we'll call this bounce. Do it 0.6 second duration, infinite, and alternate. Now alternate is the direction, the animation direction property, and what alternate does is it makes it go forwards and then backwards. So it just kind of changes the direction of the animation. So let's add this down here. So we'll say keyframes, bounce, and let's say 2. Now the width, we're gonna, like I said, it's gonna start at 0 pixels, and then we're gonna set the height and the width to 16 pixels during the animation, or at the end of the animation. And then we want to move them, so we're gonna do a transform, and let's use translate 3D. Oops, 3D. And this takes in, I think it's Y, X, Z, I believe. So we're going to do 0 and then -16, which is just going to move the dot a little bit, and then 0. And the initial translate 3D, let's just copy this and go to our span here and just set this to 0 by default. All right, so let's save that. So now you can see that we're getting that bounce animation. Basically, it's just changing it. It's on the y-axis, actually. This is X, Y, Z. So it's changing it -16, which means it's bringing it up for the animation. Now, we don't want them all going at the same rate, right? That looks kind of weird. I mean, I guess you could keep it like that. But what I'll do is add a delay for the second and third. So let's say animation dash delay, and we'll do a 0.2 second delay. And then for the third one, we'll just copy that. We're going to do a 0.4 second delay. So let's save it. And now we get that bouncing effect, and they're not all bouncing at the same exact time. Now, as for the width and the height, let's go and set the original width and height to 0 and save. And now we get that effect, because what's happening is it's starting at 0, and then the animation is growing the width and the height to 16 pixels per iteration, and also, again, moving it up using Translate 3D. All right, so those are the 3 loaders. That's it for that part of this video. Now I want to make it so that we can give it the effect where the loader shows and then it loads in some content. So I'm going to go to my index.html, and just for now I'm going to comment out all the loaders, and let's add our content. We'll actually comment this out as well. Oops. Comment that out, and then down here we're going to add our content, which isn't much. We're just going to have a section with the class of main, and let's put an h1, and we'll say welcome to my site. Paragraph, I'm going to do lorem. I think I did lorem 10 or maybe lorem 20. And then under that we're going to have an a tag with the class of btn, which isn't going to go anywhere, and we'll just say read more. Okay, and then let's include our JavaScript file while we're at it. So script source, it's going to be js main.js. Okay, so now let's add some styling for this. We're going to go into style CSS, and I'm just going to paste this stuff in because, again, it doesn't have anything to do with the loaders themselves, but you can just copy this. So our main class, let's go ahead and save that. Well, actually, we don't want to do this just yet. So we have a text-align center, width is 90%. I'm putting a transition because what's going to happen is in the JavaScript, we're going to originally set the opacity to 0 and display none, but in the JavaScript, we're going to change that after a certain amount of time, after the loader is done. And I want it to smoothly fade in, so I'm adding a transition on the main content here for the opacity. Okay, so now let's do the H1 and paragraph. I'm just going to change the size of those a little bit. Okay, and I made it smaller than I did originally, just because this is so small, this screen. So let's also add in the button stuff, and then that should be it for the main base content here. Okay, so now we have a nice little button. All right, so style CSS, we can go ahead and close that up. And let's start off with loader 1. I mean, it's going to be the same thing as far as the JavaScript goes because we use the class loader for all of these. It's just a matter of what we have commented out. So let's use loader 1. Okay, now if I do that, it's going to show both at the same time. So let's head into our JavaScript here. And I'm going to grab onto 2 things, the loader and the main content. So let's do document.query selector, and we want to grab the class of loader, and then we also want to grab the class of main. And what I'm going to do is just have a function called init, and then I'm going to run that function. There's a million ways you could do this. I'm just doing this really quick. So let's do a set timeout. And if you're not familiar with set timeout, it takes in a function. So we'll put in an arrow function, and then it takes a second parameter of the number of seconds or milliseconds that you want to wait to fire off whatever you put inside of it. And we're going to say 4,000, which is 4 seconds. And of course, you could put whatever you want. Now, in this set timeout, actually, I'm going to go back to the CSS for a minute, the main style CSS, and I'm going to uncomment this because we don't want to show the content at first. We're going to set opacity to 0, which makes it invisible, and display none actually just completely gets rid of it from the DOM. So let's save, and now we no longer see it. Okay, so now in our JavaScript here, we're going to say we want the loader style dot opacity. Oops, the hell. Style dot opacity to be 0. So basically we want it to fade out. And then we also want it to just go away completely, so we're going to set the display property with style.display, and we want to set that to none. Okay, and then we want to bring in the main part, okay, the text. So let's say main.style.display equals, and we'll set that to block, because remember it's originally set to none. So if I go ahead and I save this, let's wait 4 seconds. Okay, so what's going on here is it's getting set to block, meaning it's actually there. However, it's still invisible because opacity is set to 0. So we need to change the opacity to 1. Now I want to give it a fading effect, and if I just set it to, if I set opacity to 1 here, actually I'll just show you. So I'll say main.style.opacity equals 1, and we'll save. And you can see it just pops in, and that's fine. If that's what you want, that's absolutely fine. I just want to give you the option of having it fade in. So what I would do here is just do a set timeout and pass in an arrow function, and let's move this, not the semicolon, but we'll just take that and put that right here, and then let's put a time of 50 milliseconds, so very quickly. So it gives us a little time before it brings it in, and then it sets the opacity. Okay, so we'll save that. After 4 seconds, it comes in. Okay, it sets the block, and then after 50 milliseconds, it fades in. And the reason it's fading in is because in our style CSS, we have a transition right here. And if you want it to fade in quicker, you could change this to like 1 second. So if we reload, it should fade in 1 second rather than 2. Like that. Okay, and you can mess around with it. So that's pretty much it. Now if we want a different loader, I can just go to my HTML. Let's comment out loader 1, uncomment 2, same thing down here. Comment that, let's save, and there we go. Now we have that loader. Okay, if we want to use 3, let's try that, and now we have the 3 bouncing dots, and it brings in our content. All right, guys, so that's going to be it. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and hopefully it gives you some ideas. I mean, you don't have to use these exact loaders. Just, create your own keyframes. You can see how simple it is. This is not much code at all, or much CSS. So that's it. Thanks for watching. If you like this, please leave a like, and I'll see you next time.